One cabinet, one beautiful glass door, and one goal: to surprise my dad. In this video I'm making one of the nicest pieces I have done yet, and for two reasons it was extra special to me. The first reason is kinda personal, because this hanging cabinet was my Christmas present for my dad, and I would lie if I say I didn't want to impress him just a little bit. And secondly, of course I did it last minute, so we will see if I got it finished right until Christmas Eve. We as millennials really like to talk shit about the boomer generation, which my dad is part of. And yeah, you can debate their flaws all day long, but there's one particular thing I really admire about boomers, and especially about my dad. They were, or still are, ruthless executors. I mean in a good way. They got shit done with no complaining, no excuses, or in other words, the boomer generation is the equivalent of a durable Toyota truck with high mileage and still going strong. So please don't retire, we need you. My dad was also kinda crazy, because he renovated several houses and did all the plumbing, electrical work and even the central heating by himself, although he worked full-time as a lawyer. Remember, back then there was no YouTube Academy, so he had to read books on how to solder water pipes and then just did it. And that's the mindset he raised us with. If you want to build something, figure it out. Sometimes his methods were a bit questionable though, like when I was 12 mixing concrete with just a shovel. And I remember thinking, is this really the best way to do this? But hey, when your kids are free labor, who cares about efficiency? These days you see dads who can't even fix a leaky tire of their children's bike, and that makes me kinda sad, so I'm grateful that I had a different upbringing. My dad still lives in the same old house where I grew up with my two sisters and brother. Although many things have changed over the years, this bathroom still feels the same since I can remember it. So for quite some time my dad was talking about wanting a hanging cabinet for all those cosmetics that were crumbling up on the top of his old cabinet that he wanted to get rid of. So for a while I had this minimalist design in my mind, but I wasn't so sure if I should go for a classical shaker style or do something different. I knew my dad would love mitered corners as much as I would, so that part was non-negotiable. Sometimes it's best to let the room make the fundamental design decisions, but let me explain. The wall where the cabinet would go had a very specific width, and right underneath it was the toilet. So in this particular case, the surrounding architecture seemed to dictate the final dimensions of the cabinet. Sure, I could have made one that maxes out the space, but designing is always a balancing act between what is needed practically and aesthetically. And I hope that's the sweet spot right there. As I mentioned, I was thinking about a shaker-style cabinet, and I was kind of thrilled to make one, partly because I never built one before, but also because I got this reeded glass that I really like to use as a cabinet door. Now that's when I noticed that I got stuck. On one hand, I wanted the mitered corners to stand out. On the other, to incorporate a shaker-style glass door would have caused weird proportions due to the dimensions given by the dedicated wall. I mean, does this look right to you? I don't know. So eventually I threw the shaker style door out the window and did what every good European designer would do, making it minimalist. Don't get me wrong, but I feel like European design and architecture is kinda glued to Bauhaus with all its dogmas. But hey, there are tons of great examples for it, and what I'm making here is kind of what I'm complaining about now, which is maybe relatable. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is, designing is always a balancing act. Well, my dear American friends, I'm sorry to admit this to you all, but the main useful reason for making a shaker-style glass door is that they can go with European-style hinges, because they are simply the best. Since I decided to go without them and the comfort of the adjustable hinged superiority, for the first time I had the feeling that this build wasn't an easy ride home. Finding the alternative and giving up on the first approach happened simultaneously, and if I was a spiritual person, I'd say it was destiny, but I'm not. I found these glass door hinges on Amazon, and at first I got really excited because having this beautiful piece of reeded glass as a door on its own, meaning without a wooden frame, was truly daring but aesthetically a huge win. But a minute later I realized installing these hinges would require a high level of accuracy, because I had to drill out these holes before gluing up the cabinet sides, so there was no room for errors. This is maybe a good moment to dive into the making, because who wants to hear about different hinges all day? I started 2 days before Christmas with prepping the cabinet sides by cutting the beech plywood to rough size first and then adding the edge profile made of solid beech wood. Thanks to the plywood, there's no reason to worry about movement due to the humidity in the bathroom. The coved edge profile gives the cabinet a touch of 3-dimensional depth as an interesting design feature, but also houses the 2 glass door hinges. So right before gluing up the 4 mitered cabinet sides, I took my time and carefully marked out the holes where the hinges would lock in place, as well as the shelf pins. This was actually the day before Christmas Eve, and back then I was working on 2 other projects simultaneously that you can check out here. So taking my time was a big luxury during this build, and just as I was drilling those holes, I felt this tension and uncertainty of working on parts that aren't assembled yet, and you know they have to go together perfectly. In moments like these, you realize it's not just always fun what you're doing, but that's why it's called passion, right? To keep the glue up clean, I taped the inside corners of the cabinet beforehand in order to prevent excess glue from sticking to the plywood. Well, to my unpleasant surprise, I couldn't get all the tape out afterwards because it got stuck in between the miters, and that's when I really wanted to fire myself. But not having a Christmas present for my dad was no option, so let's move on. Alright, the glue up of the miters with the tape method went straight forward, and after I checked the diagonals for accurate squareness, I could jump to one of the other projects that I was getting finished that day. Once the glue had set up, I put the back panel on, and people who know what they are doing will identify this as birch plywood. In general, I don't feel beech and birch plywood go well together, but in this case I don't think it's a terrible choice, as the back panel is closed off most of the time. Let me know if you don't mind it, or if you actually do, and why. I'm curious. And since we're getting closer to finishing this project, I want to thank you for watching. It really means a lot to me putting out my work here and reaching people who are into design and making too. Many years ago, when woodworking caught my interest right from the start, I was drawn to machines like table saws, routers and CNCs. Now I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I actually thought using hand tools was kinda dumb, because why would you do the work with your hands when a dedicated machine can do it? In hindsight, it was stupid and also a bit arrogant to think that way as a beginner, and seeing me here joyfully using a hand plane might be the perfect definition of the irony of history. In 4K. Also, I absolutely hate using the plunge router. After cleaning off the edges of the shelves, I finally unpacked the miters, and they looked alright. I had better results before, but the gaps weren't too bad, so I could nudge them together with a little love from the screwdriver. The front edges needed a little hand planing, but that was done quickly and quietly. One more thing I absolutely love about using hand tools. They're not that loud, and especially hand planing sounds so oddly satisfying, right? So, what's your favorite tool sound? Let me know. It seems like you have to use Rubio monocoat if you finish a piece of furniture here on YouTube, and to be honest, it's a great product and I can recommend it without any doubts. But it's not the only finish option, so please enjoy watching me putting on this hard oil. This stuff is different because it soaks deep into the wood fibers. I wanted to darken the color to get a teak-like appearance, and that's where this oil literally shines. It's not that scratch resistant, but this won't get abused like a tabletop, so I think we are fine. I sand it up to 180 grit, and you may ask, is that actually enough for plywood, or should you have sanded to a higher grit like 250 or even higher? Well, not really, because this is beechwood, which is naturally much denser than birch, so this plywood is incredibly hard, and you can witness in my last video how I broke a drill bit by trying to drill out pocket holes. I used the same plywood in my most recent project that is coming up soon, and doing that build I broke nearly 4 drill bits again, but I found out later that they were just garbage quality when I tried the original one from Craig on the same plywood. Also, the plies are quite thick, so I could actually use the thickness planer to take off just a teeny tiny amount, and that resulted in a very nice surface quality and shortened the sanding time by a lot. Now let's put in the 3 shelves and finally install the glass door. I will say this over and over again. This feeling you get when the vision you had for weeks and months eventually becomes reality is the reason I cannot stop developing and making things. It's powerful and addictive. But did I make it on time? Well, good for me that the curing time of this hot oil is so short, and it was actually dry to the touch when my dad unwrapped his new custom-made hanging cabinet later that evening. But it still had a strong smell, that's for sure. In hindsight, these little door hinges saved me so much time because I didn't have to build a frame for the reeded glass, and installing the European door hinges also would have taken up additional time. So doing it the minimalist way paid off in that regard, but also aesthetically, because having this glass door framed only by the profiled front edges of the cabinet just looks so sleek. I love how the reeds of the glass create this optical distortions, so you know there are items behind the glass, but you don't know exactly what items. Of course, my dad was super happy with the cabinet, and I actually caught him inspecting the mitered corners from time to time with a smile on his face. Well, will I ever be able to calculate time and effort properly? I don't know. But I do know that in the end, it's always worth it. At least it feels like it. I hope you like this project, and see you next time.